Hey, are we live?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, there we are. We're live. It works. All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone to Sunshine Cathedral Christians and Cocktails. We are live and we can say anything will possibly happen and can happen. But let's begin with a toast of whatever you have there. I got a
Toast
here. Toast. So glad you're with us here this evening. Just as a way of getting started. Of course, we do Christians and Cocktails on Mondays at 6 p.m. Midday prayer Monday through Friday, Monday through Saturday at noon.
Like we said, anything can happen.
Anything.
Right.
That's how we lost Robert.
I think so.
We've lost him, but I see that we're still live. I guess we can keep going, right? All right.
Yeah, I think so. Who needs him?
Yeah. The our executive minister, the Reverend Dr. Robert Griffin, may or may not be back with us. We'll see. Here's the thing: we live in the tropics, y'all, and it's storm season, and so our connection to the planet is kind of iffy sometimes. So, and we're all in our homes. Yeah. Anyway, so we're all in our homes. He's at the office, and so apparently things aren't working great. He's back. So anyway, what's happening is I'm Darrell Watkins, the senior minister of the Sunshine Cathedral. The order is different on every screen. To my left is Benito, Dennis and Tito, super key volunteers at our church. Below them is the Reverend Margarita Rodriguez. She's our minister for spiritual companionship. Then to her, well, to my right of her is Tara and Sam. And they are artists in residence at the Sunshine Cathedral, and then below all of us is the here and not, and here again, Robert Griffin, executive minister of the Sunshine Cathedral. So we've got some questions in the queue. I understand we have some questions on the panel, unrehearsed, that are going to come at us. Also, if you have a question, there's two ways you can get them to us. You can right now in the discussion just type in a question. Tito's moderating that. He'll either ask the question as we're speaking, or he'll put it in the queue for us to get in the next week or two. The other way, you're not anonymous that way. We can see who you are if you're right. So if you don't like that, you can email us a question. We'll put it in the queue, and then you're totally anonymous. So you can email questions to Durrell, that's 2 R's, 2 L's, DURRELL at sunshinecathedral.net. So that's how you can get your questions asked. Do it right now on the or throughout the next half hour in the discussion. Just type it in, or email me, Durrell at sunshinecathedral.net, and we'll put it in the queue for future discussions. So that's that. All right, I understand that some of you have questions that aren't in the queue that we haven't thought about, haven't seen. I believe those come from the same household. So,
Me first.
Let's have some of that.
Okay, can I?
Yeah, go first.
All right, so we finished off last week with Tito's question about where can a transgender person see a reflection of themselves in the Bible? And that got me thinking about gender just in general. And so my question is, why does gender exist?
I'm going to take a stab at it. I'm not it's not my field of expertise. I actually did take some coursework in graduate school around gender performance, and that especially in our culture, gender is performative. And so we sort of learn what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to act, and that's usually assigned to us based on our biological sex. But of course, now we know that gender is a brain thing. Biological sex that is assigned to us by, the OBGYN or the midwife that delivered us, that's about genitalia, and yet how we identify, how we experience ourselves in the world, how we innately seem to want to express ourselves, that's a brain thing. And so you can have female genitalia in a male brain. And how do you resolve that? And we make it difficult to resolve that because we expect people who look a certain way below the waist to act the way we tell them to act. And if that's not who they know themselves to be, now we've created dissonance and dysphoria and angst and pain in their life. And so all of that we know. Who first thought of it? Who first made it up? I don't know. There are Native American cultures that have 3 genders. And so there's, you know, there's the male role for people who, for men who identify as a man and who look like what the world says a man should look like. And then there's the female role, who what people identify as female and who look like what the world says a female should look like. And then there's this third gender, this queer gender. I don't know if it applies to people who were born without testes. I don't know, but for people who were born with testes, but who turn out to be what we used to just would assume were gay men or whatever, they get to perform, or historically got to perform, a role, and it was an accepted role, sometimes even an honored role, where that person born biologically male would basically cross-dress and live as a woman, and sort of serve as the other wife, or as the mistress, or whatever. And so there was this third gender. There's also in some Native American cultures a concept called two-spirited, where you don't just fit into a societal role, and so they say you have 2 spirits. And so there are cultures that allow for diversity of gender expression. Western patriarchal, militaristic, hierarchical, classist cultures have not been that so much. And so I don't know who first came up with men are men, you know, boys are boys and girls are girls, and these are the rules and the roles. But I know who it was designed to privilege, and that's men. So I assume that the categorizing of gender has something to do with keeping half the population under control. And then the men who don't act manly enough, well, then that's another group of the population you can keep under control. So, the more people you can put into a category and denigrate and control, and that leaves fewer and fewer people to have all the power. And so I don't know who created the system or exactly when, but I certainly know who has benefited most from it.
But why were we born with genitalia?
That's not gender, that's sex, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, genitalia.
So,
that's just reproduction.
Okay. So
Insert
why
that-
were we born with either one or the other? Like, why isn't there just a universal genitalia that can, what?
No, evolution.
There are certain animals that can do that.
Yes, there are. Now, there are lower forms, but there are. In biology, when you're talking about bisexual animals, you are talking about like a worm is going this way and a worm is going that way, and they sort of bump up against each other, and and they get knocked up. So that's so they're bisexual animals. Evolution, we didn't get that. We got thumbs. So I wouldn't trade.
Okay, we can move on.
Sarah's had enough to drink, she can ask anything.
Right. If somebody has better sciencey answers, please jump in.
Like, why do we have holes?
Wow. Okay. I think I'm going to ask Sam to ask a question. I don't know now, though.
You got to make up for my questions.
Sam, no, I think Sam had a question, though.
She does.
No, I did. So I was telling my mom that we're coming back next week to the sanctuary, to the church, and that it's Pentecost. We're doing that on Pentecost, and she was like, "Wait, you guys celebrate Pentecost?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know." And when I was a kid, I think we accidentally went to a Pentecostal church or something, and it was very frightening for me. And so I only associate Pentecost with that experience. And so I was wondering if sort of what Sunshine Cathedral's take on Pentecost is, and then what's
the relation?
Yeah, I guess what the relation is between that and that, because I think
Pentecost Sunday and the Pentecostal church.
Yeah, because I didn't think that. I thought only Pentecostals did Pentecost, but I mean, I'm not very informed. So
strangely enough, Pentecostals are less likely to observe Pentecost.
What?
Yes. Because Pentecost, we do the liturgical calendar, and so we follow seasons. It's a way of living rhythmically and cyclically. Probably Margarita can even discuss this better. So it starting with Advent and Christmas and Epiphany and Lent and Eastertide, which we're still in until Sunday, and then Pentecost, and depending on your tradition, the season of or the season after Pentecost. If it's all in June, we tend to call it Pride Tide. Yay. And then after that, there's Ordinary Time all the way till Advent. And so all of those seasons from Advent is the expectation of a Messiah to come. And of course, the people who identified Jesus as the Messiah thought the Messiah had come. They thought they figured out who it was. And so that's Advent waiting. Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, all the way up to Good Friday, that's all remembering and celebrating the life of Jesus. And then Easter and Pentecost, those are celebrating the continuing life of Jesus. After he's executed, how people continue to experience Jesus, and then how the church sort of embodied Jesus and started moving forward. After Pentecost, the rest of the year then is Ordinary Time, and that's about us then being the church. So about half the year is the life of Jesus, and then the rest of the year is us being Christ in the world, ourselves as the church. So that's how it's divided. That's the rhythm, and we repeat it every year after year. That's our lives as Christians, or as the kind of Christians we are. So Pentecost is 50 days after the resurrection, whatever that was. Lots of discussions about that. Then the Spirit descends on a group of people in the upper room, and that sort of energizes the church. The church was in mourning. The movement was in mourning. The movement was afraid. The movement was sad. And so the Spirit comes to enliven the church to be the return body of Christ on earth. A lot of people are still waiting for Jesus to, make a trip back. A lot of us think that we are the trip back, that the Spirit descends on the church for us to be the body of Christ in the world. And so that happened. Now, Pentecost was the Feast of Weeks. It was already a Jewish holiday, and which was 50 days after Passover. And so these Jewish followers of Jesus, sort of reinterpret this Jewish experience. And also remember, the prophet Elijah ascended into the heavens in the story. There was always a legend that he would one day return, which is why you leave a place for Elijah at the Passover meal. And but when he goes into the heavens, a double portion of his spirit falls on his disciple Elisha. So I think when Luke is telling us the story of Pentecost, he's borrowing that story and applying it to the church. And so the prophet Jesus ascends into the heavens, and his spirit falls on his disciples, the church, to continue, just as Elisha continued the work of Elijah, the church continues the work of Jesus. So that's the liturgical, that's the historical, that's the scriptural, ta-da. Put a pin in that. In 1906, in California, on a place called Azusa Street in the Los Angeles area of California, 1906, something called the Azusa Street Revival broke out. And that's the birth of the Pentecostal movement, where people, and it was kind of a brilliant moment in time. People, regardless, women could preach. There weren't racial divisions in the movement for about 15 minutes. I mean, it all got jacked quickly, but at the very beginning, like, women could preach. There weren't racial divisions. There weren't class divisions. In fact, the blue collar working class, maybe less educated, actually sort of made up the movement, because it was about spiritual gifting, and God could give anyone any gift, and so people could become evangelists and pastors and missionaries and whatever. And it was empowering, and they believed in miracles and speaking in tongues and all this sort of thing. So that happened in 1906. And so the Pentecostal movement are basically saying, we're the return to the primitive church, to that day of Pentecost. And so Pentecost for them is a way of life and not a day that happens once a year. So those are the two, as I understand it, the difference between the Feast of Pentecost and the Pentecostal movement.
What does all this have to do with fire? Isn't there a thing about fire?
Well, there are pyros always with us. Actually, no, in the story, in the legend, in the myth, right? In the story, Acts chapter 2, the Spirit fills the room that they're in, this upper room in Jerusalem. And the manifestations of the Spirit is that there was a sound like, it's a simile, a sound like a mighty rushing wind in the room. And there are a couple of windows in that room, but you wouldn't get a rushing wind, right? So there's a sound like a mighty rushing wind, like a whirlwind, sort of maybe like the one that took Elijah into the heavens. There's a sound like a rushing, and there are little bursts of flames that dance over each apostle's head. And remember, there was sort of this forecasting where John the Baptizer said, I baptize you with water, but there's one coming after me that will baptize you with spirit or with power or with fire. And so at the day of Pentecost, supposedly there's this mighty wind, and there are dancing tongues of fire just sort of in the air. And I always thought that was a strange, like, why that image? Like, you're a writer, you can do whatever you want, but why that image? Why little dancing flames in the middle of the air? When I was at the upper room last year, it was such a powerful experience for me. I went twice. When I was in Jerusalem last year, a group of us, and I was in the upper room, I looked up on the ceiling when I was there, and there's all these people from all these places speaking all these languages, and yet I get what they're there for and what they're all chattering about, because so even though we don't speak the same language, we're there for the same reason. You sort of get what everyone's doing. And I looked up on the ceiling, and the shadows of all the people in the room were dancing on the ceiling, and it, honest to God, looked like tongues of flame. And so of course, fire is purifying and it's energizing. There's lots of symbolism for it, but it's also possible in that room, you looked up and you saw something that looked like dancing flames. I think if that were the case, the writer certainly knew what it was, but still the imagery is so powerful, the writer probably thinks, I can work with this. I can tell a story with this. And so there was, in the story, dancing flames above the heads of the faithful. Something that isn't usually, you didn't ask this question, but I'm gonna share this anyway. Something that isn't usually really hammered when this story is shared, though, is that the group meeting there in that upper room had become sort of a little a community, sort of a church, and it was led by Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so you have, and in a lot of art, early church art, you will see frescoes and icons and portraits of people in the room, in the upper room, flames over their head, and you'll see Mary in the middle. And that's probably because, or at least according to one tradition, she was the leader of the group that was meeting in that room. She was basically the pastor of that little church. Not always, maybe after things got going, she just went home and had a little retirement, but she was basically the interim leader of the movement for weeks, months, who knows. And so the Pentecost story, the Pentecost narrative also has a place to really feature the divine feminine and women in leadership in our movement from the beginning.
Now we don't have to go to church on Sunday because we just got the Pentecost sermon.
Hey.
You don't get out so easily.
You got the Pentecost lesson. I don't even know what the Pentecost sermon is going to be yet. But,
I haven't seen that email yet. Yes.
all right. Anybody else? Before we get into the actual queue of nobody? All right. Well then, Robert, why don't you go to the prepared list? I think we have 5 questions. We may get to 2 of them. Some of them have been there so long I don't remember where they came from, but one came in today. I remember where that came from, and one came from Facebook. It was asked on the church's page. We answered that already, but it's such a good question, I just threw it in the queue. And the others, I think one maybe Danitos, I don't know. So but so anyway, we don't know necessarily where they all come from, but they're good questions. So Robert, give us one of them.
Okay, in the Bible, God spoke to Adam and Moses, Noah, and others. I guess he spoke through a donkey and through a snake. But the question is, why did God stop talking? And this seems like with everything that's going on in the world right now, it seems like God should still be talking. So, punt.
Sometimes you've just said all that you've got to say. And it's been said, you don't want to repeat yourself, so you just clam up. That's probably not the case. Here's honestly it's actually an important question, because it makes us figure out what we believe about God, what we believe that God is. And some of us still hold on to this image of God is like it's like Queen Elizabeth in Buckingham Palace, right? Just grand settings, far away, can't quite get to her. He has a throne, and so people have that sort of image of God. The God is this far away, grand, majestic, and so we can ask ourselves, why did Queen Elizabeth say that, or why didn't she say that, or why is she still working at 95, or we have these human questions because we see her for the woman that she is. And so we sometimes treat God like that, like God is this person, and we can't figure out why this person is doing things that differently than the way we think persons should be doing things. Or we think of God as sort of Santa Claus rewarding good behavior with withholding favors if you don't behave. Or we think of God as just being perpetually angry and just always like a really grumpy grandparent or a really bad babysitter, just looking for ways to torment the kids or whatever. The orphanage director in Annie, the Mrs. What's her face?
Miss Hannigan.
Hannigan, yeah, we think of God as Hannigan, just in charge and mean, right? And I think that is the problem with anthropomorphizing God, making God, always discussing God in human terms, and calling God father or even mother. Like, that is one of the ways to understand God, as being a nurturing parent, a protective parent. That's fine, that's great. But if we stop there, then we also tend to infantilize ourselves. And so we can't really grow too much because we've cast the roles. God is the comforting or strict parent, and we're the kids, and we never get to grow up in that framework. And so when I also think that's one of the great things about Pentecost. Pentecost focuses on this experience of spirit, this wind. Where did it come from? Where's it going? What does it look like? It's just wind, right? And Jesus said, God is spirit, or at least John through Jesus says, God is spirit. And the creative power of God is the Ruach, the spirit, and the creation myths. And at Pentecost, it is the spirit that fills that upper room and energizes the church. And so I think of God as this power and this presence, and not so much as this mother or this father or this grandmother or there's Mrs. Hannigan. And so this power, how this power speaks, is by energizing us to think and have ideas and be creative. And so when God is speaking in these stories, storytellers are telling these stories. Storytellers are writing these stories. It is human creativity that is giving us these stories. And so, yes, the creativity is divine. The intellect is divine. The artsy part of us that wants to tell and share stories and think through issues, that is divine. So it is God, but it isn't Queen Elizabeth giving a decree from the throne. It isn't Queen Elizabeth putting a medal on somebody or giving someone a title. It is human creativity. It is human beings expressing something that seems to come from beyond them. Often, I will just have a burst of things. I'll have a feeling. I'll just go with it. And when I'm done, I've written something. Or I will have written something and I'm preaching and I will stray from the script and things flow almost seamlessly that I haven't prepared. And they're sometimes the best part of the sermon.
Yes.
And so when people do that, sometimes they say, oh, that was God, or that was the spirit, or that was my higher power, or that was the ancestor speaking through me, or that was my angel guiding me, or whatever. And they come up with these spiritual and artistic ways of describing it. So yes, ancient storytellers would say, God says. But it's the storytellers telling us that. And maybe they honestly believe that it was God speaking through them or moving through them, and who's to say it wasn't. But if we think that Queen Elizabeth is going to write us a letter and mail it to us, she probably isn't. And if she does, that isn't necessarily how God works. So I don't think that God ever stopped talking. And I also don't believe that God ever did talk exactly the way that some storytellers imagined it. So, you know, I think when I hear a lyric of a song that really speaks right to me, when I hear a line in a play or a movie that speaks right to me, when I, from the clear blue, have a thought that seems super genius and I don't know why I had it, when I hear someone else say something super genius and I don't know why they're saying it in my presence, or I just look out and I see something super, super beautiful and it makes me feel things or think things. I think God is speaking to me. I think that happens to all of us all the time. We just maybe didn't grow up in a storytelling culture, where we had beautiful ways to mythologize that and make it sound powerful and magical and pass it on. But I think God is speaking to us. And so the question isn't, why isn't God speaking? The question is, how can we learn to listen the way our very creative ancestors did? That might be true for spiritual director. I don't know.
Well, I think it's just like you said. It's just how we learn to listen to the movement of the Spirit. If we are aware of it, I think the Spirit moves every day through each one of us, right?
Mhm.
And if we pay attention, we get it. If you
Yeah.
don't pay attention, it's okay. It's there anyways. We're
Right.
just not paying attention.
Pay attention later.
Exactly. It's
Can't
up
get
to
wrong.
us. It's always going to be there. It's eternal. So no hurry.
And there are origin narratives of sacred text. The Book of Mormon, the angel Moroni, just delivers these tablets. There's some sort of hat involved where someone would know how to understand the language. It all goes away at some point, but it's all written down. And so it came from heaven. This angel Moroni just brings it, and here it is. The Quran, same thing. I think it's the Archangel Gabriel that just dictated it. And the prophet writes it all down. No mistakes, no errors. Of course, in miracles, someone who isn't even from a Jesus tradition, someone who's not even particularly religious, starts getting these messages, interdictation. She starts writing it down in shorthand, I believe. I don't know. And she and a friend, work out later, work it all out. So it's just sort of like almost a channeled work, for her. I think the Urantia book comes like from people from another planet or whatever, and so there's these stories about how these sacred books came. The Bible has no such sacred story, and we act like it does. The Bible, there was no angel brought us the Bible, no spacecraft, no channeling, right? People wrote stories and sermons and histories and plays. The Book of Revelation, please never put an S on the end of that word. The Book of Revelation is this sci-fi drama. I honestly believe it was dinner theater performed at places where people would gather for sort of burial societies, where people without families or resources or whatever would make sure that they had proper burials. Well, to make that an event, you'd have dinner and you'd have entertainment, you'd have political debates and poets. And I think Revelation was basically dinner theater for these events. The Book of Esther not only is very dramatic, there's even some drag in there. The Book of Jonah, clearly a story to be told in the marketplace. It's a short story. You can perform it as a rhapsody. The Gospel of Mark, same thing. I think that the Gospel of Mark is meant to be heard in one sitting by a performer. The Song of Songs is a medley of songs, of erotic songs, talking about romantic love, a forbidden love between people who aren't supposed to be together, and they sneak away and they do their things anyway. And so there's all of these beautiful stories written as performances And then there's other things that are written as poems or songs. The entire Psalter is a hymn book, or there's sermons, or there's prophetic warnings, or there's even legal documents. These are human things. And then human councils decided what we would keep and what we wouldn't keep that would be our Bible. And then human translators translate the languages, human preachers and teachers teach these things. This is a very human endeavor from beginning to end. And so, which is why I love it. We don't have an angel dropping it off and now we got to figure it out. We don't have space people from a planet we've never heard of dropping it off and now what are we going to do with it? We have this evolving tradition and we get to be part of it and engaged in it and add to it and argue with it. And so if I write something today, maybe God speaks differently in the story I create than what other storytellers did. So we need to remember that the Bible is an ongoing human endeavor, and God is in the movement, God is in the endeavor, God is in the sharing, God is in the wrestling, God is in the playing. All these things that we do in scripture, that's where God is. God isn't limited to the imagery that a particular writer came up with forever ago. When the creation myth says that God is looking for Adam and Eve, hey y'all, where are you? All the oxen free. God doesn't know. God doesn't know. And God waits. God looks for them, walks through the garden in the cool of the day, because 2 p.m. would just be too hot for God. I mean, we have to, right? And so these stories are beautiful and wonderful and fun to play with. And we haven't been allowed to know how expansive and broad they are and how much we bring to them as we read them and discuss them. So yes, in somebody's story, God says this. In my story, we'll see what God says. In your story, we'll see what God says. So let's not ever take the human element out. I think that's what makes our scriptures so wonderful and so beautiful, is that they weren't dictated by God. God is in the playing and wrestling with the human work. Let's see if we can do one more quickie. Someone should ask.
I don't know if any of them are quick. I'm looking at the question going, well, we kind of talked a little bit about it, so why don't we throw this question in there? What was the reason some of the books of the Bible were picked or some of these books were picked and put together as what we know as the Bible, and then there were other things that were excluded?
I guess I can make that quick. The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, that was already the Hebrew canon. So the church just took that. Now, the Hebrew canon wasn't as closed as it wound up being. Some Greek-speaking communities accepted as scripture things that were written in Greek. When the canon was closed, they decided only to accept things that were originally written in Hebrew or Aramaic. And that's why, and so the early church was using scriptures that included works that were written in Greek to begin with, which is why the church has more text in the Old Testament than the Hebrew Bible does. And so you have Baruch and Tobit and 1st and 2nd Maccabees and Judith and so on, some additions to the book of Daniel. And so you have those extra, because they were excluded when the Hebrew canon was closed, but the church was started before it was closed. So the church took as the Old Testament the Hebrew Bible that Greek-speaking people were using. Then councils for a few hundred years hammered out. There were a lot of letters and poems and sermons circulating around, and some councils hammered out which would what they would accept and what they would not into their New Testament. Revelation almost didn't make it because it's so the imagery is so bizarre, and they thought people aren't going to understand this. They're going to take it too literally and scare themselves. Ding, ding, ding. And then also Martin Luther, He wrote commentaries on every book of the Bible except for Revelation. He just couldn't be bothered. But also Martin Luther hated the book of James. He called it a straw epistle, that it was good only for using as like straw in a barn for donkeys to pee on. He called it a straw epistle. And so the Eastern Church, when they were battling all this out in the first few centuries of the Common Era, the Eastern Church actually loved Revelation. Western Church not so much, but the Western Church loved James. The Eastern Church not so much. So compromise. Okay, we'll give you Revelation if you give us James. And so that's how they both wound up in there. The Gospel of Thomas was floating around, very popular, may even be as old as the book of Mark. Some of us now think. Thomas didn't make it. It was a sayings gospel, and they wanted narrative gospels, gospels that told stories. And Thomas doesn't really tell stories; just says a lot of things that Jesus said, and so it didn't make it. Also, they decided that there were 4 corners in the world. World's flat, has 4 corners. We should have 4 gospels. So we can only have 4. We'd like them to tell a story, and we'd like it to not be too weird. I mean, you know, virgins having babies and dead people coming back to life, that's pretty weird, but we don't want clay pigeons coming back to life. And we don't want toddler Jesus killing his friend and then resurrecting them so he doesn't get in trouble. And some of those stories are in some of those weird, so what I should say weird, some of those fascinating. So anyway, they decided
Cemetery.
Yeah, it was just a council of, they worked out. They voted. We want this, we don't want that, and they just battled it out. And so that's how the Bible, our Bible, came to be. Now later on, in the Protestant, after the Protestant days came on, a lot of the Protestant churches took out of the Old Testament those additional things that wound up from the beginning. Tobit, Judith. I mean, like if you're Baptist or Assembly of God, you have no idea what I'm saying when I say Judith or Tobit or First and Second Maccabees or those things. So for a long time, really until about the 20th century, most Bibles would keep those between, they put them all together between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they would call it intertestamental literature. So you could at least read it and know that was part of our history. But after the fundamentalist movement of the early 20th century, Protestant Bibles stopped doing that. And you'll notice that we do read from those things in our liturgy at the Sunshine Cathedral. It's in our cycle of reading. So anyway, so that's the Bible. It was a process. It took a lot of people. It took hundreds of years. Protestants tend to use a few less books in the Old Testaments than Catholics. Eastern Orthodox actually have some more. I think not only maybe another book or two that I'm not familiar with, but also an extra chapter in the Psalms. Psalms have 150 chapters. The Eastern Orthodox Bible has 151. So it's all kind of fascinating, really. No judgment, no tea, no shade, just the way it is. And it's better to know those things, to know just how diverse and rich our tradition really is. So when people say, I want a traditional view, well, which tradition? We've got so many. And most of us don't know many of them. So let's have fun and learn some more. Robert?
Oh, was that it?
Well, you want to do another one?
No, because otherwise we'll probably take a little bit more time than what we have or want to take up. So,
Well, no, I was calling on you to wind us up. But if we're going to take 4 more minutes, give me that one about Leviticus.
How does the pastor understand Leviticus 18 and 20?
As complete BS. Thank you for joining us.
well, that's a quick wrap up.
That Greek is strong, isn't it?
I kid the Torah. That's where those are one verse in chapter 18 and one verse in chapter 20. That's where people lift up. Those are 2 of the clobber passages where it says, a man shall not lie with a man as with a woman. Well, I've never lain with a man as with a woman. I've lain with men successfully. So it's not been the same at all. And enjoyably. Didn't do it the same at all. But
Sweetness.
oh, sorry. Sweetness, that's husband talk for it. Dial it back. Anyway, no. So man should not lie with man as with woman. So that's where that comes from. Now, this is from a pretty big book of scripture that says that a woman can't really go to worship for 33 days after she has a male child, or 66 days after she has a female child. How many times in church have you seen someone bring their 1-week-old baby to show off, right? I mean, but so clearly they're not taking Leviticus too seriously. Leviticus is the book that forbids tattoos. I don't think there's an uninked body on this discussion. Hello.
Oh, Margarita didn't raise her hand. Okay.
Oh, well, we all have secrets. We all have secrets.
Oh, just learned something.
Oh, no.
The Leviticus is where it insists that we keep kosher, not eat pork, not mix certain kinds of foods, not mix certain kind of fabrics. And so Leviticus is a book that most of us, I'm not speaking about Orthodox Jews, I'm not talking about people who tried to really keep all the rules, but for most of us, especially most of us Christians, the book of Leviticus is something we almost wholly ignore, except for 2 verses that we use to make gay people miserable. First of all, if you were going to take it 100% literally, then lesbians are totally off the hook. Women aren't even mentioned in it, right? So please don't use that as an excuse to be mean to lesbians. And second of all, if you've got a tattoo, if you're eating shellfish and pork, if you've ever let polyester touch your body, 1, shame on you, but 2, it's not about, well, those of us who are older, we did go through the 70s. It was the law, we had to. But it was, if you've ever, grown crops that more than one thing, and you had a garden with a lot of different things in it, you mix the crops, then Leviticus is not an important text for you. And what is funny to me is between Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 is Leviticus 19. And that is where Jesus gets the phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. That is Leviticus 19. People skip over 19 to get to 20 to gay bash, when Leviticus 19 says, don't treat people in a way you wouldn't want to be treated. You wouldn't want to have your whole life minimized and reduced and discarded because of who you love. You wouldn't want the most precious thing in your life, your loving relationship. You wouldn't want someone to tell you that was evil or awkward or bad or disordered. You wouldn't want who you are and who you love to be dehumanized and denigrated and demonized. You wouldn't want that. So, love your neighbor as yourself. Treat other people the way you'd like to be treated. And people who use Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, 100% are giving the middle finger to Leviticus 19. So, so there's that. If you're not living by Leviticus, you can't beat people up with Leviticus. Just because you found 2 sentences that agree with your prejudice. Second of all, and you can apply this to Romans, you can apply this to anything you think is your ace in the hole to be mean to gay people. Same gender loving relationships are never ever condemned in the Bible. Now, slavery is apparently condoned, or at least not condemned in Scripture. So, and we all think slavery is evil. So even if the Bible did say, those gay people, not so much, we could disagree with it, but it doesn't. Same gender loving relationships are never condemned. In fact, there's some times when they seem to be applauded, blessed. And we can talk about that and can talk about it in future episodes. But loving relationships, even mutual relationships, 2 people who just seem to enjoy each other. In fact, we talked about the Song of Songs. Song of Songs celebrates lovemaking. The lovers in the story never get married in the story. It's a forbidden love, and the marriage never happens in the story. And so the Song of Songs is a celebration of sexuality expressed before marriage. So have you some of that. But so anyway, when the clobber passages that people use are always condemning acts of violence or exploitation. And one of the things that would happen, and Leviticus is telling a community how to live. There's a code in there, and it's telling how to live and to not be like other nations, because this is a small and new nation. They need to distinguish themselves from other nations so they don't get swallowed up by other cultures. So this is how we're going to be unlike other nations. So there's a lot of rules. and some of them for safety. Don't eat pork. Well, in a time before refrigeration, eating pork in the desert could be a death sentence. So let's don't do that. It's not because pigs are innately evil. They could be dangerous in this context. And one of the things that ancient armies would do when they would conquer villages, tribes, countries, is they would humiliate the defeated warriors by raping them. Do not lie with a male as you would with a woman. Do not humiliate men by treating them like women. So the prohibition itself is an insult to women. Like, if it were women, it'd be okay, but don't treat men like women. Men deserve better than that. And so it's a sexist and patriarchal thing to begin with, and it is a prohibition against rape, man on man rape. And every such prohibition, the Sodom and Gomorrah, there's an attempted gang rape. It doesn't really take a professional ethicist to say that's bad, but you never see two people saying "I love you," or being tender with each other, or wooing each other, or flirting with each other, or trying to seduce one another. You never see the playful mating rituals that happens in love. You don't see any of that. You see a lot of people outside the people's door saying, "Throw these strangers out here so we can gang rape them." Well, of course that's terrible, but that's not homosexuality. That's not bisexuality. That's not love. That's not a relationship. That's not dating. That's not even a key party in the 70s. That's just violence, right? And so every time you see the clobber passages used against gay people, those are always in the context of violence or exploitation. Love is never condemned. In fact, we're told in 1 John, God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God, and God lives in them.
And we're going to call it right there. Great question for the night. Keep sending your questions in. If you do have questions, you can post them on the thread, or you can actually email them to me, and I'll take them and move them on. I actually email them to Darrell. Darrell at sunshinecathedral.net is even better. And so we'll get them in the queue for you and all that wonderful stuff.
2 R's, 2 L's.
2 R's, 2 L's. Just as a wrap-up reminder, we do have a midday prayer Monday through Saturday at noon. Christians and Cocktails on Mondays at 6 p.m. And this week at the Share New Share is Reverend Sheila McKeitha. And Darrell, who is she?
Sheila McKeithen is the president of the Universal Foundation for Better Living, the denomination organization founded by the late Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman. And Reverend McKeithen also pastors a church in Kingston, Jamaica. She's a great preacher and teacher, and I'm super excited about talking with her on Wednesday.
And that's Wednesday at 6 p.m. Also, as a reminder, this coming Sunday, we are returning to worship service here at the Sunshine Cathedral at 9 and 10:30. You must have a reservation in order to attend. The link is on the Sunshine Cathedral website at sunshinecathedral.org, along with some of the restrictions and things that we have in place in order for you to attend worship with us.
Gotta wear masks.
And you got to wear a mask. You got that social distancing and everything going on. There'll be no communion, no altar call, things like that. But all that is spelled out on the cathedral website. But if you do, if you're in the Fort Lauderdale area and like a place to worship, we invite you to worship with us this Sunday in the room at 9 and 10:30. But you must have a reservation in order to attend. We will still live stream the 10:30 a.m. service, so you can catch that on Facebook as well as on YouTube. So, parting comments from our panel, and we're going to start with Margarita. Closing thought.
Closing thought. I think, it was a great conversation. So I think the reminder that our book, our Bible, it's written by humans, and that we can really live and play with that text and really challenge that text. And that the Spirit moves still today. We just have to pay attention.
Amen. Bam.
Me.
Yeah.
Oh man. I just love talking to you guys. I love learning more about all this stuff, and I love that I can pretty much ask you anything and you don't get upset with me.
Yes, absolutely.
Tara.
Yeah, that was pretty much my answer too. I can ask ridiculous questions, and I'm among friends, and no one's going to judge me, and I'm on the internet, but it's okay.
A few of your 30,000 closest friends will listen to this later.
Yeah.
About it, Dennis.
Well, I'd like to say that we have those folks out there that'll grab those individual pieces of scripture and use those against us, and they like to cherry pick. because like Darrell was saying earlier, you know, they don't live by all of Leviticus because 19 says, hey, love everybody, you know. And guess what? We get to do the same thing. We get to pick the parts that matter to us. And that's what Sunshine Cathedral does, is we throw out all the crap and we bring in the good, and we only teach the good, and we only teach the love. And I think that was the message of Jesus. And I think that we do a great job of sharing that same message even today.
Tito.
I'm glad that Sam asked a question about Pentecost, because as a kid, I mean, now that I've been going to Sunshine Cathedral, I get what Pentecost is about. But the whole fire question, that I never got the fire. And as a kid, the fire would scare me because in my head it was associated with hell. So I feel a lot better about it now. So the
Yeah,
fire
I actually had a huge
more as the spirit.
I had a huge aversion towards anybody talking about anything like that because the fire stuff really scared me. And
Yeah.
it really turned me off from church because to me, church became scary and there was a lot of like yelling. And I would just, I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Like, it just really freaked me out.
The reason we have, I mean, candles are used in a lot of traditions, but one of the ways that Christians interpret the use of candles in worship is that that represents the fire of the Spirit. So those candles on the altar, that's supposed to be the flames of the Spirit. Also, if you haven't yet seen our Memorial Day message that Tito put together, it is beautiful. He just swiped something I said in church yesterday, made a beautiful video out of it. And it's so see it. Just really what a gift our whole team is at Sunshine Cathedral. But thank you for that, Tito. It's wonderful.
All right, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us tonight, and a toast to you for being with us. And again, thanks for being us. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday, either in the room at 9 and 10:30. You must have a reservation, and also we'll go on Facebook Live as well. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great evening.
Robert, clear
Yeah.
something up for me. Do you need a reservation?
I think you need a reservation, or I'm sure I know there's one greeter that will not let you in. If you do not have a reservation.
But-
Get your reservation. It's
Get
how
your
we're going to maintain the distancing.
Yeah, sunshinecathedral.org. All the information is there. Look forward to seeing you either Facebook, YouTube, 10:30 on Sunday, or in the room. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.